methods over time. And we'll hope that you're already using some of these or are anticipating using more of these. And we're all looking forward to see how they will be applied and how we can use these tools most effectively going forward.
All right, thank you, Joop, and thanks to all of our speakers here in this session. This now brings us to the question and answer segment of our webinar. We'll try to get through as many questions as we can, but we are offering up on the screen everyone's email address, so perhaps later on if you have some follow-up questions, we would welcome you to contact any of our speakers here today to follow up with some of those questions. Also, if you have any general comments on the layout, format, or contents of the webinar itself, please feel free to send an email to either Gina Ahlstrom or myself, Kurt Smith, and let us know what comments or suggestions you may have. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Van Dam, who will administer the question and answer session then. Tom?
Thanks, Kurt. The first thing I would say is for 125 people, you have been somewhat silent, so please don't be shy about submitting some questions. But I'm going to start with a question for Steve Mensch. In a triple bottom line sustainability, there's three components that exist. We have the economics, environmental, and the social. Why do we seem to, why is the social impact considered to be less than other components? And related to that, Steve, is, which elements within that social impact are important? So,
that's a good question, Tom. I think the short answer is because we're engineers. But that's not a good answer, though. I don't think it's less important at all. I think the emphasis, and I can speak in terms of what I know of rating systems in general, has been on the environment. And I can tell you, let me answer this in two quick ways. One, I think if you look in the guidance document that we're talking about, Chapter 9 actually attempts to deal with that, I think, that very question, which is basically sustainability in the larger picture. You'll notice our guidebook spends a lot of time, kind of neck deep in pavement systems, and that's what it's meant to do. But I think if you back out for a minute, where you see the social component come in is sort of the next system level up. Certainly you can translate some of these metrics and numbers that you get out of pavements into social impacts like greenhouse gas emissions and things. But I think if you go to the next system level up, you talk about you then talk about pavements, their contribution to roads, and the road contribution to what I would call sustainable communities. So an example of that might be at the federal government level would be the Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which is the USDOT, HUD, and the EPA. And if you look at that, you actually find several spots where pavements can actually contribute. Let's see. Oh, yeah. If you look at it, they can actually contribute to sustainable communities in that they can help provide more transportation choices, increase mobility, and lower the combined cost of housing and transportation. Think about a neighborhood that has a really crappy pavement network versus one that's much better. Expand business access to markets, increase or improve community revitalization efforts. Oftentimes community revitalization starts, or a centerpiece of that is with a street improvement. And even increase the efficiency of public works investments, and all the way down to creating walkable neighborhoods. Oftentimes we hear the phrase thrown around, complete streets, which is great for that coalition. In other words, thinking about a road as not merely a way to transport or to get vehicles from one section to another, but also basically people in terms of biking, walking, and HOV access. So I think if you look at the next level up, the social component comes into play. That said, if you look at rating systems, and we've done that here at the University of Washington, you'll find that they kind of all see those three components of sustainability roughly the same. And if you divvy up the points, you'll probably find 30% of this rating system is dedicated to social issues, 60% to environment, and about 10% to economic issues. And we think that that is likely due to where these rating systems come from. They're generally developed by rich countries who, despite what we, there are many issues within our country, but relatively speaking, social issues or socially, these rich countries are better off. And I think you see that.
Thanks, Steve. Do any of the other panel members want to chip in, or I'll give you 2 seconds. All right, 2 seconds is up. There were actually 2 questions submitted regarding the MIT research on pavement vehicle interaction. Many of you might be familiar with that work, in which they compared vehicles, or they looked at modeled vehicles operating on a rigid surface versus a more flexible surface. Basically, we are going to have an opportunity to talk about that in more detail in webinar number 5 on September 9th. But I think I will add here that what the document basically points out is that probably the most important factor out of the ones that they look at between that interaction is roughness of the road, probably followed by macro texture, with the pavement stiffness being the third. Although right now there's a fairly intensive effort underway at UC Davis, is working with MIT and other universities around the country, and even from Europe, to kind of validate models. And so I think we're going to see a lot more on this coming up, and I think it's probably best that we wait till we have more data come September 9th. So that's where that lies right now. So the next question that I have, I'm going to direct to Joop. And Joop, this one is, how common is it to conduct an LCA on a pavement project? I know you were talking about it, but specifically, are there agencies that might be using this type of approach right now?
Yes, thank you, Tom. That's a good question. Fortunately, we're in a time where more agencies are doing pavement LCA. I'm not saying all of them are doing it. I'm not even saying most of them are doing it, but we're seeing this pick up more and more. And I think this started in Europe about 15 years ago. It started here in America, I'd say about 10 years ago. I remember a study from Michigan DOT 5 years ago where there was a review of reviewing sustainability practices like using recycled content and whether that would actually drive a benefit after having had experience with several of these projects and actually knowing performance and behavior. The best example that I can give today would be the Illinois Tollway that is developing an Illinois Tollway LCA tool where they're not only going to be looking at pavements, but also at structures like bridges and median barriers, landscape, drainage, and lighting. So it's not just pavement, it's everything that they control, and they want to understand the sustainability performance of it. And those tools are actually going to be used for their main pavement projects that they're planning during their improvement projects. So it's not for all pavements, but for most of them. And currently they're using that to compare it to current day practices to practices where they were in the year 2000 to see if they have progressed in sustainability. And they're preparing themselves so they can use this during the design and bid and actual build process where they want to do a very rough LCA, just like you would do an LCCA during the tender process, the bidding process, do an initial design review, follow the design when it gets more refined, and actually build, and then do the final LCA at completion, looking at how it actually was constructed. And the idea is that they're implementing changes, standards and practices change over time. We think we're doing the right thing by calling things sustainable because we feel like it is sustainable, and they want to do the life cycle assessment to actually quantify what actually matters most, and they hope that they get a confirmation that things they have changed so far will actually add up to something that is better and start to tie us into something they could call is better than what they were used to doing. Now, like I said, it's not saying that everybody's doing this, but we're seeing more and more. A lot of research is also being done by various universities in the country, University of Illinois, UC Davis, but there are more, mostly focusing on the use phase and modeling pavement-vehicle interaction. And so we're going to see a lot of work from that coming forward, and hopefully this will give us practical tools that we can actually use them in project-by-project Pavement LCA applications as well.
Thanks, Joop. Did anyone else on the panel have anything to add?
I've got about 30 seconds from Steve here. I can tell you that we're also participating in some work here at the University of Washington with the World Bank, working with their what they call C40 cities around the world in doing capital improvement programs that pay attention to climate change and specifically greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're working with them to find simple ways to do what amounts to a simple life cycle assessment for some of these cities, and you know, for many of them, the road infrastructure and pavements in particular are a major component of what they do. So I think I agree with you. We'll see more of it, and we're seeing more of it now.
Great, thanks. The next question is specifically for Alyssa, and it said, could Alyssa review the points she was making about the challenges of considering the end-of-life phase for pavements considering rehab cycles?
Yeah, so I think the question refers to the fact that the end of life for pavements can be a bit confusing. So first off, life cycle assessment methodology was originally conceived of for consumer products, where you typically have much more a clear moment where the consumer product is ready for disposal or end of life. In the case of pavements, instead, we end up removing portions of the pavement for rehabilitation. So imagine that we mill a pavement prior to an overlay, and we have material that we've removed, and that material could be recycled or disposed of in landfill. So I think the challenge there is to remember that at each one of those events, we're going to generate some portion of the pavement that's going to be considered in the as entering the end-of-life phase, whereas the whole pavement system may still be in use. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that may have been what the question was asking about.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, this is you. I think it's a really interesting topic, especially also for the pavement industry. We've all heard of perpetual pavement. Where does the life end when you're looking at perpetual pavement? But that's not a theoretical question anymore. That's actually a practical question that we have to deal with. And there's also a difference in practice of different DOTs. Some DOTs are basically end of life is rehab and nothing more, and there's DOTs that do mostly full reconstruct. And so full reconstruction is the most clear end-of-life point of a pavement. But doing mostly rehabs ties into what Alyssa is alluding to. How do you actually then say what is end-of-life, and how do you deal with applying the rules of life cycle assessment? And there are ways to deal with this, and one way of looking at this is presented in the framework, the LCA framework that we're developing, looking at these very different instances and how you should calculate your LCA results against it. And one way of looking at it, if you want to reduce the impact of these choices in the LCA, maybe if you express results on a per year basis, you can start to reduce the impacts of a full stop at a certain point in time where you call it end of life, but just model it out on a per year basis and sort of smoothen out some of these choices. So there are ways to deal with this, and it's relevant to Pavement LCA.
Thanks, Joop. The next question I'm going to start with Steve, and then we'll see where it goes. The question was, why are the environmental points of these sustainability efforts not converted to dollar values so that these benefits can be included in the LCCA? Then the follow-up with that was the use of competing comparison methods makes a decision on the value of sustainability efforts seem suspect and somewhat meaningless. So Steve, we'll start with you because it has points, but my guess is other people may also.
Could you go again with the second half of the question? I dropped out a little bit there.
Yeah, the second part was that what I'm interpreting is by not monetizing these impacts, what happens is the value of sustainability efforts seems suspect and somewhat meaningless.
Yeah, so why can't you monetize everything to do with sustainability? Things are hard to monetize. It's easy to monetize something when you have to buy it, right? But a lot of these impacts are much larger and much more distributed than a particular project. So they become hard to monetize. Hard in that it's difficult to translate an environmental benefit to a dollar benefit. I'll give you an example. What's the benefit of water that's X% cleaner because it's been treated better? That's a difficult one to do. People have tried it. Like a scenic view is something that that is considered in many of these rating systems, and it's hard to monetize that. People have done it, but it's not a very accepted practice, generally accepted practice. So what you may think the dollar value is of this, I may think something differently. And we can even talk about monetizing CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, and we haven't nearly settled on that yet. And there are a wide number of different ways to think about that, and perhaps Joop and Alyssa can address that. But yeah, so if you don't monetize something, how do you consider them? And the answer is, I think you need to go beyond economics and sort of have your evaluation practices for projects and for project alternatives grow up to go beyond economics. Some of these other considerations are really important, and many of them are not under the direct control of the agency that does the road. I'll give you one short example. We looked at a project that Federal Lands Highway was doing in Puerto Rico on a national wildlife refuge, Vieques Island. And they put in a box culvert, a triple box culvert on a particular project that did nothing to expand the capacity or improve the quality or distress of the road, but they put it in. And so if you were looking at that from a roadway agency perspective, it didn't really add much, but it cost $250,000. But if you step back and looked at it from the point of the National Wildlife Refuge, it actually improved the tidal flushing of a mangrove forest behind that particular road, such that they think they're going to be able to nurse that forest back to health, where the previous single box culvert was not able to do that. So from the broader perspective, that's a huge savings. You could try monetizing an entire mangrove forest, but it's going to be a lot more than $250,000. And I'll stop there.
Joop or Alyssa, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think Steve's point about the challenges of monetizing what we call externalities, right? So costs that are not part of our formal transaction is particularly problematic, and so I think that if you're concerned with accuracy and uncertainty, monetizing impacts adds a whole other layer to that, to the uncertainty of the results.
Yeah, I agree. It also has a spatial dimension to it, because these environmental costs, if you put dollar values on it, can be very different from location to location. Steve pointed out. There are approaches in Pavement LCA that are trying to convert life cycle assessment results into monetary units. They're not perfect, and so I agree with Alyssa. Nothing like that is perfect. But there are different approaches to look at it. And one of the approaches that is being used in a country in Europe, where it's actually used as a